these things by jumping on the keys of Don Marquis's typewriter. But he could never reach the capital because you had to hit the shift key and the letter key at the same time, and the cockroach couldn't do that. So everything is written in lowercase. So here is an Archie poem. And you will tell from the last few lines that it was probably written sometime in the 1920s. It's called Plaint of Spring. Plaint, P-L-A-I-N-T, plaint, like a complaint. Plaint of Spring. Why do not any of you poets tell the truth about spring? All I ever hear of is violets and jonquils and crocuses and swallows and so forth. Not a word of sooty snow and melancholy suburbs and downtown alleys, sweating mud and influenza germs taking a new lease on life, and winter underwear beginning to itch along the human shin, and snakes beginning to crawl out from under straw stacks in the country, and livers turning grouchy, and granddad feeling so young in the noonday sun that he overdoes himself and then has to go to bed with a lumbago, and pneumonia suddenly rushing back after everybody has thought it was gone for good, and kicking people unexpectedly in the unprotected lungs, and peach trees starting to bud and getting frozen to death, and businessmen making love to stenographers they do not really give a damn about, and getting in bad and messy backyards with sore-eyed cats in them, cursing the March moon at midnight, and no Bach beer anywhere anymore, and everything. Why do not the poets try to tell the truth? Yours till prohibition prohibits. Signs of spring. Can everybody hear me? Last December, we celebrated the winter solstice, as is our custom, with revelry, including a mummers play. In the play, the hero, St. David Downwinder, expertly played by Bill Collins, does battle with the pilgrim nuclear dragon, slays the dragon, but then has to die himself. He gave a little speech to explain why he was dying. First comes Christmas, then comes spring. Like winter I must die, then to life again like spring. The wheel of the seasons turns, and in the dark times people look for hope that the sun will come again. The traditions of revelry around the winter solstice may be based in ancient pagan ritual to try to ensure the return of the sun, or they may be simply a psychological coping mechanism for dealing with the dark times ahead. We look around in January and February and see very little growing. In the present day, we have the luxury of getting fresh produce all year around, thanks to a worldwide transportation network. But for our ancestors, the cold months threatened starvation as well as death by freezing. At any rate, if we've seen the return of the sun, I hope you will all be grateful for the pagan rituals we performed 3 months ago to bring this about. Here we are a quarter year past the winter solstice, what is in theory the beginning of spring. The actual hour of the vernal equinox was 6:45 p.m. on Friday, Eastern Daylight Time, which was when we were having the potluck dinner at our contradance. I celebrated the time ritually, as I often do, by bringing some eggs and trying to balance them. The kids who were there for the dance all pitched in to help. I managed to get just one egg upright for about 30 seconds, and Charlotte Edgecombe had one up for about the same time. None of the kids succeeded. Balance. The equinox is when the length of the night and day come into balance. My colleague Thomas Rhodes writes, over our head the great wheel of the stars shifts, and the vernal equinox manifests itself, and for one precious instant, darkness and light sit in balanced proportion to each other. Within our minds, the great web of neurons shift. New consciousness arises, and for one precious instant, experience and meaning exist together as revelation and epiphany. Now, whether this egg balancing really says anything about the state of the world, I doubt. But outside it was starting to snow yet again. A month ago, I titled this sermon, Signs of Spring, hoping that we would see some by now. But I haven't seen daffodils or crocuses or robins. Before Friday's snowfall, the garden plots around the church looked as bare as they had for months. The most that you could say was that some of the bare limbs of the deciduous trees around town were taking on a subtle but definite cast of green. I'm told that the red-winged blackbirds are here, though I have not seen one. I've seen other snowbirds, members of this congregation, return from their southern travels. Well, let me ask you, what signs of spring have you seen? Anybody?
Robins.
Robins? Okay. What else?
Flower, actually, yes, in the papers on yesterday. Yeah.
Flowers in the paper, the newspaper, right. Okay. The newspaper photographer found some hyacinths pushing up. Yes.
And we're daffodil greens.
Daffodil greens. Okay, good.
We have wind shades. All the flowers are blooming in the garden, in the shrubs.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're ahead of us.
I have a pregnant fox.
You have a what?
Oh, she runs across looking for food, but she looks like she's ready to have kids.
Fox. Okay.
I have a skunk under my deck. And I think
Okay.
she's
That's a sign of spring.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I know.
The critters are out looking for mates. Yes.
Snowdrops in full bloom when the snow melted.
Okay, okay. Well, we also think there's probably something going on beneath some of these dirty snowbanks that are around here. We have faith. A couple of weeks ago, the combined children's and adult choirs sang a song from Peter Pan. That brought me back to my early childhood when Mary Martin starred in that play on TV. One of the most moving parts to my young mind was when the fairy Tinkerbell was ill somehow, and the light which represented her was flickering and about to go out, and you, the audience, had to bring her back to life by believing in her. If you believed in Tinkerbell, Tinkerbell would live. If not, she would die. Maybe you were supposed to clap. Maybe that was the stage play or the Disney movie. They all run together in my memory. Anyhow, I want to call this the Tinkerbell effect. Something that is inherently improbable, like the existence of a little fairy being, can actually be true if enough people believe that it is true. What does this have to do with spring? I have faith that spring is not subject to the Tinkerbell effect. Spring has happened every year of the 67 years I have lived through, and I have confidence that it will happen again this year, whether any of us believes it or not. Spring is belief independent. Tinkerbell is belief dependent. It will happen whether eggs balance on the equinox or not. It will happen whether there are late snowstorms or not. There will be crocuses, daffodils, mud, rain, baseball openings, the Final Four, Easter outfits, top-down rides in convertibles, tax day, the marathon, and maybe even a maypole. It's coming. I know it is. I don't even ask you to believe or applaud, just to wait in something like good humor. Another thing that you can believe in is the pledge drive. Now, I know as soon as you hear the word pledge drive, you're all public radio listeners, and your hand reaches instinctively for that dial to change the station. But you can't do it. You're trapped. The pledge drive is not quite as sure as the coming of spring. It's a little bit like Tinkerbell. It happens if you believe in it. It takes a leap of faith every year to commit yourself to making this meeting house solvent. Suppose it disappoints. Suppose the minister says something you disagree with. Suppose you have a falling out with someone. You may want to take your marbles and go home. That's why I say this meeting house is ultimately more like Tinkerbell than it is like spring. It lives if you believe in it. Philosophers call this a social construct, something that exists because everyone believes it to be so. Spring may be early or late, but it will come quite independently of how we feel about it. Not so the meeting house budget. That only reaches the heights to which we are willing to push it, both in our pledges and in our volunteer work and other fundraising activities. The good news is that confidence is up. We are doing so well in this current fiscal year that we have not had to raise the reserve fund to make monthly expenses, even in these lean winter months. Dwight Wilson, our treasurer, who is stepping down at the end of this fiscal year after faithfully guiding us through some challenging passages, projects a modest surplus this year. Modest surplus. Did I say that right? Modest surplus this year. This meeting house is bricks and mortar, but it is also a social construct. It is what you want it to be. Last summer, I came off of sabbatical 2 weeks early because leadership deemed us in the throes of a financial crisis. We made the decision to present a budget to annual meetings which anticipated a second canvass to bring it into balance. The second canvass was conducted and raised about $7,500 of its $10,000 goal. And meanwhile, several other factors on the expense side of the budget eased up and new pledge units came online. The storm clouds passed, but not before they had seeded us with some fertile developments. One thing that is good to do if you're asking a congregation for more money is to engage in conversation about what the ultimate mission of the place is, what we're doing here. We had 2 visioning conversations in the summer and fall, and a lot of good specific ideas came out. After one of the conversations, I remember someone saying, "Well, I hope after all this talk, somebody does something." I think your board heard that sentiment loud and clear. In a few minutes, you will get a brochure from the Pledge Committee. That brochure summarizes what the congregation seemed to want in the visioning conversations under 4 headings: membership growth, increased outreach, improve the UUMH facilities, and retire the mortgage debt. As to the first and second goals, we have restructured the responsibility for projecting our public presence with the hiring of Jan Young as communications coordinator. Jan has convened and is chairing a publicity committee which has responsibility for the website, Facebook page, press releases, etc. Between that committee and the membership committee, we're generating new printed materials and talking about logos, mottos, and branding. There's a whole conversation going on about public outreach that simply wasn't there a year ago. How many of you noticed a difference in the weekly Friday morning bulletin about 6 months ago? A few of you? Yeah, okay. How many of you noticed a difference in the website? Okay. That's a whole new initiative in trying to interface more effectively with the public. Let me jump now to item 4. As for retirement of the mortgage, the key thing is how many people feel this is a priority. I remember talking to Dave Johnson, the interim minister who preceded me here, and he told me that he had recommended to the leadership in 2007 that they consider a drive to retire the mortgage. But some of you will not give that a high priority. The mortgage payment is something of a drag on the operating budget, but we have managed to pay it without difficulty all these years, and it doesn't look like anything bad is going to happen if we keep paying on it. On the other hand, if there are a sufficient number of people with a sufficient interest and means to raise the $150,000 needed to get Cape Cod 5 off our backs, why not do it? It would free up about $10,000 annually, which is 5% of our $200,000 budget. But I look at mortgage retirement in the context of item number 3, facilities maintenance and improvement. We had much discussion at the visioning process, and we've had much discussion since then about the specific items like movable pews, floor or carpet replacement, pew cushions. Wouldn't you like to have some pew cushions? New windows, interior painting, exterior painting. The Buildings and Grounds Committee is in the process of preparing a comprehensive list of what needs to be done, the approximate cost of each item, and where each item stands in priority. Now, the first visioning conversation floated the words capital campaign. I want to say right off that this was not an idea planted by leadership. Going into the conversation, we had no idea of directing it toward that particular end. So we have a situation where the membership itself suggests a capital campaign. That speaks powerfully about the willingness of this congregation to engage in a deeper commitment for the long-term good of the meeting house. That has not been forgotten, and we may yet roll out such a campaign. But in light of the stronger showing we've had in our overall operating finances, the board is looking at whether we can accomplish the punch list that the Buildings and Grounds is preparing by another route. We have had the recent successes in this congregation of special purpose fundraising that brought us our great new organ and the lift. You probably don't remember, but it also brought us a considerably less sexy asset of a repaved driveway the year before that. The message I want to convey this morning is that this list is in process, and it may result in something we call a capital campaign, or it may result in a differently structured fundraising. There is a commitment in the present leadership that it will be addressed in some fashion, for the congregation's desire that we upgrade our physical plant has been heard. Now that's all by way of setting this pledge campaign in context, the context of the overall picture of where this meeting house is going. The pledge campaign proper is for the operating budget, the salaries of those employed here, the utilities and the committee budgets, and the snow removal, the ongoing three-ring circus that is life in a congregation of this size. As we contemplate our pledges for the next fiscal year, I want to encourage each of us to also think of the intangibles. What does our meeting house do in the towns of Chatham, Harwich, Orleans, in the context of Cape Cod, in the context of the Commonwealth or the country? How could our outreach be extended or improved? Are we an effective witness for our values? And in that regard, I want to ask you, sometime when you're in the village market parking lot, look back at this building. It is imposing because of the hill on which we sit. But you will notice different things depending on the eyes you bring to it. One feature that certain people will focus on is the rainbow flag. If you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, that flag may be the first thing you notice, because it says something very specific about the people who come together in this building. It says these people commit to accept you for who you are. Sometimes you use today will take an attitude of, yes, so what? As if all of American society was prepared to accept GLBT people for who they are, as if this battle for acceptance has been decisively won. But it is not so. And the evidence is not just from the backlash that equal marriage is getting in conservative state legislatures. It happens more subtly but as strongly here on Cape Cod. I had a lesbian friend recently describe what she felt was so special about Provincetown. In P-Town, she and her wife can walk the street holding hands and offer a kiss or embrace whenever they feel like it. She says as she drives back down the Cape, she feels steadily less welcome to engage in public affection with her wife. Even in Wellfleet, she's uncomfortable holding hands. That rainbow flag stands for something. It says, come, lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual. It says, come, able and disabled. It says, come, white skin and black and brown and red and yellow skin. It says, come, young folks and old folks. It says, come, Christians, pagans, agnostics, atheists, Buddhists, Jews. It says, come, advanced professional degree and high school dropout. It says, come, type A and type C and everything in between. And if our pledge campaign did nothing but ensure that it would keep flying in one of the most visually prominent places in Chatham, it would be worth every penny. This meeting house is greater than the sum of its parts. When we put our collective wills and ideas together, When we bring our financial resources and our time and our love, especially our love, to bear, we do far more good in this world than any of us can do alone. This is part of the Tinkerbell effect. We have been waiting for signs of spring through a lot of harsh winter weather. The poem by my colleague Mary Wellmeyer reminds us that spring itself has a spiritual aspect. For some of us, she says, winter never leaves the heart. We must move the seasons of the self, or light on our faces will ever remain a myth. This is truly a matter of life and death. What birds need to fly home to your spirit? Where can you find love? What sun will melt the frost in your heart? What buds are waiting for a touch of warmth? For myself, I have confidence that spring will get here eventually. There are flowers underneath those snowbanks. There are boats waiting to get into the water. There are migratory birds starting their flights from southern ponds. There are short-sleeved tops in the closet that will soon see the light of day. Spring will come to this earth whether we believe in it or not. But the Meeting House budget, like Tinkerbell, will only come if we believe it. We recreate the Meeting House every year, every month, every day, by simple acts of faith. But we can do it. We can all fly. But first, I have to throw a little fairy dust on you.